Lena Martinez had never seen so much white in her life. White flowers crawled up the marble columns of the rooftop terrace. White silk draped over rows of golden chairs. White lace gathered at her wrists as she clenched her trembling hands. Somewhere behind her, the hum of New York traffic still rose and fell like a distant tide. But here in this glass and marble tower that scraped the sky, the world felt far away. She had always wondered what her wedding day would look like. Maybe a small church back in Queens where she grew up, maybe a simple dress borrowed from her mother's old trunk. She had never pictured this. Never pictured herself standing on top of the Coltec Tower, wind tugging at her veil, a diamond heavier than any promise pressing against her finger. She had never pictured herself marrying Adrian Cole. She could hear them whispering, the men in tailored suits shifting in their seats, the women leaning close, eyes sharp with curiosity. They all knew the rumor. Everyone did. The billionaire who never touched a woman, the heir who nearly died in a car crash and came back with a secret no money could fix. Impotent, broken, too powerful to be pitied but too cold to be wanted. They looked at Lena and saw the answer to a problem she could not even name. The poor girl from nowhere, the virgin bride meant to be a shield for a man who did not want to be touched. It should have made her feel small, but all she could feel was the rush of her heartbeat against her ribs. Her father sat in the front row, thin shoulders stiff in a borrowed suit, eyes glistening every time they flicked to the giant Coltec logo shining behind the altar. She knew what this marriage meant for him, for his debts, for the house that would not be taken away next month, for the hospital bills stacked in secret drawers, for survival. So Lena stood still. She kept her chin lifted. When Adrian turned to her, she met his eyes as pale as winter sky, as unreadable as the city skyline at night. He did not smile. He did not flinch. He simply looked at her, as if she were a piece of a puzzle he had decided to fit into place. The officiant spoke of union and family, and vows that could not be broken. Lena's ears buzzed. She remembered her mother's voice once saying, "Love is soft and loud at the same time." She wondered if her mother would say this was love. Adrian's hand closed around hers when it was time to slip the ring onto her finger. His skin was warm, warmer than she expected for a man so carefully distant. His touch was steady, precise, not gentle, but not unkind. She wondered if he felt the tremor in her palm, if he cared. When the final words were spoken, the officiant's voice rose above the hush of New York wind. "You may kiss the bride." For a second, she thought Adrian might step back, that he would deny the ritual as he denied every rumor that clung to his name. But he leaned in. His lips brushed hers once, brief, dry, a promise not to linger, not to claim. A murmur rose behind them like shifting paper. Then it was over. He stepped away. His eyes flicked to the skyline instead of her. She tasted the absence of him more than the touch. He offered her his arm and she took it because that was what good wives did. Good wives who signed contracts written in gold and white silk and whispered secrets. When they walked back down the aisle, Lena heard someone say, "Poor girl," under their breath. She wondered if they meant her family, her father's debts, her empty future, or if they meant her, the virgin bride who would never really be a wife. She looked at the man beside her, the man who had bought her freedom with chains she chose to wear. She wondered if he would ever look at her like a woman instead of an obligation, and somewhere deep inside the tightness of her chest, a single thought whispered louder than her heartbeat. What if he did? When Lena was 8 years old, she used to sit on the cracked front steps of her father's tiny house in Queens and watch planes cut across the sky. She would trace their silver trails with her finger and imagine where they might land. Paris, London, anywhere but here. Her mother would come outside, wipe flour on her apron and tell her to come inside before she caught cold. Back then, Lena believed life would give her more than cracked steps and peeling paint. She never guessed her escape would look like this. Adrian Cole did not belong to her world. He belonged to pages of newspapers, the hush of financial news, the glossy covers of magazines that praised his mind and questioned his soul. He was only 32, but he had built an empire that reached from Wall Street boardrooms to half the skyline she used to watch as a girl. Cole Tech was his crown jewel, a name on every smart screen, every new patent, but Cole Realty was the fortress, a real estate giant that made him the quiet king of glass towers and luxury spaces, like the one where she now stood, wearing his ring. People liked to talk about Adrian. They said he was brilliant, ruthless, cold. They said his father died young, leaving him a fortune and enemies. They said he lived alone in a penthouse no woman had ever stepped into for more than a polite charity event. Some said he was lonely. Some said he was broken. Most whispered about the night 4 years ago when his car spun out on black ice upstate, shattering bones and rumors in equal measure. No one knew exactly what the accident had taken from him. They only knew he never dated, never entertained, never touched. The tabloids called him the untouchable billionaire. The rumor that stuck hardest was the one that made her stomach knot every time she closed her eyes. They said he could not want. They said he could not feel. They said he had more money than any man needed, but no fire left in his blood. Her father never cared about the rumors. He cared about foreclosure notices taped to the front door, about medical bills they hid from the neighbors, about collectors who knocked too early and too often. When the letter came from Cole's legal team offering to clear every debt, every threat of eviction, every secret shame, the answer was always going to be yes. Lena had asked her father once if he thought she would be happy. He had touched her cheek and looked away. "Sometimes love has nothing to do with happiness," he said. "Sometimes love is what we trade to keep breathing." Now she wondered if Adrian felt the same. If he looked at her and saw a contract in white lace. If he ever thought about how her life fit into his cold glass puzzle. He had spoken less than 20 words to her before today. When they met for the first time at the Cole boardroom 3 months ago, he shook her hand like she was a junior associate instead of a future bride. His eyes had flicked down to the ring-size paper clipped to the contract, then back to her father's shaking signature. Then he nodded once, like a deal was sealed, and turned away to speak to his lawyers. She thought maybe he would call her later, ask if she was sure. He never did. Every detail of the wedding was handled by people in suits and headsets. She was measured, fitted, given a schedule and an apartment close enough to his tower but not so close she might be mistaken for something real. She wondered if he had seen the final dress, the flowers, the rooftop, if he had cared that she liked peonies better than roses, or if the white roses matched the image he needed to keep the world at bay. Even on the day of the ceremony, his voice was quiet but decisive. He greeted her father with the firm handshake of a business partner, not a son-in-law. He turned to Lena with a polite nod that made her cheeks flush with something like shame. When they posed for photos, his hand rested just behind her waist, never pressing, never claiming. She had read once that body heat could reveal desire. She wondered if his hand hovered to keep the warmth from giving him away, or if there was simply nothing to hide. The moment the officiant said husband and wife, she searched his face for any break in the mask. There was nothing. He signed the final paper with the same pen he used for million-dollar contracts, then slipped it into the inner pocket of his jacket like any other deal closed. Now she sat beside him in the back of a sleek black town car as they left the rooftop behind. The city lights blurred outside the tinted windows. His phone buzzed once in his palm, but he did not answer. He stared straight ahead, the faint glow of passing traffic catching the hard line of his jaw. She wanted to ask what he was thinking. She wanted to ask if he regretted it. She wanted to ask if tonight he would touch her like a husband, or leave her to sleep alone in a bed too large for one body to warm. Instead, she folded her hands in her lap, the new ring cold against her skin. She turned her eyes to the city beyond the glass and wondered if the planes overhead still left trails for girls like her to chase. She wondered if the girl on the front steps would even recognize the woman she had become. The car ride back to the Cole penthouse felt longer than any flight Lena had ever imagined as a girl. She could hear the steady rhythm of the city beyond the glass, the occasional wail of a siren swallowed by layers of traffic and neon. Beside her, Adrian sat motionless, one arm resting against the leather seat, the other draped loosely over the edge of the door. He did not speak. He did not look at her. If not for the solid warmth of his presence, a breath away, she might have believed she was alone. When they pulled into the private entrance of the tower, a uniformed doorman held the door open for her with eyes politely lowered. She stepped out, gathering the folds of her gown with trembling fingers. Adrian stepped out after her, offered his arm for a moment so brief she wondered if she had imagined it, then walked ahead through the marble lobby without waiting for her to catch up. Inside the elevator, she watched his reflection in the mirrored walls, his posture perfect, his face carved from the same cold stone as the city's tallest buildings. The doors slid open to the top floor with a soft chime. The penthouse stretched out in quiet, dim luxury, pale wood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city like a painting that never slept. The butler, a man called Harris with kind eyes and careful steps, greeted them with a bow before disappearing down a hallway. Adrian paused at the edge of the foyer, one hand tucked in his pocket. "I have had the guest suite prepared for you," he said, voice calm, almost gentle. "You will find it comfortable." Lena turned to him slowly, the silk of her skirt rustling around her legs. "Guest suite?" The words rang inside her skull, dull and heavy. "I thought," she started, then stopped herself. His eyes flicked to hers, then away, just as quickly. "This arrangement does not require you to share my room. You deserve your privacy." She felt something twist inside her, an ache deeper than the cold marble under her feet. "But I am your wife." Her voice was thin but steady. "You are," he agreed, "but you have no obligation beyond what we agreed." His tone softened at the edge, but the distance in it felt like a wall too high to climb. She wanted to scream, to press her fists against his chest, to demand something she could not even name. Instead, she nodded once, as if any of this made sense. He gestured down the hallway to the left. "The blue suite. If you need anything, Harris will be outside." He turned away without waiting for her answer, his footsteps fading into the shadowed corridor that led to the master bedroom. The door clicked shut behind him. Lena stood alone for a long moment, staring at the place where he had vanished. Then she turned and walked to her new room. The suite was beautiful. Pale blue walls, crisp linen sheets turned down with military precision, fresh flowers ranged on the vanity, soft lamps casting a golden glow that made the space feel almost tender. But the bed was too big, too empty, too cold. She sat at the edge, slipping off her shoes one by one. The diamond on her finger caught the light, and for a moment she hated it. She hated how heavy it felt, how cold, how it reminded her that she was someone's problem solved. She lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling until the lines blurred. She imagined Adrian on the other side of the penthouse, maybe pouring himself a drink, maybe sitting alone at the edge of his bed, maybe not thinking of her at all. A wife in a separate room, a secret neatly folded behind a door that would never open. She wondered if this was all she would ever be. A name on a legal document, a woman untouched. She wondered if he thought of her as pure or pointless. The days that followed moved with an unsettling quiet. Every morning Lena woke in the vast blue bed, and every night she lay down alone. She ate breakfast at the long glass table while Harris brought her coffee and fresh fruit. Sometimes she saw Adrian at the far end of the table, sleeves rolled to his elbows, eyes on the morning's newsprint. He did not look at her. He did not ask if she slept well. He simply rose when he finished, nodding to Harris before disappearing into his study. Once she tried to break the silence. She cleared her throat, asked if he wanted her to join him at the charity gala that week. His eyes lifted from his paper just long enough to pin her in place. "That is not necessary," he said. "Harris will arrange a car if you wish to go out." The words fell like snow between them, soft and final. After he left, she sat at the table alone, her tea turning cold. She wanted to scream at the staff for pretending not to see. She wanted to slam her cup against the marble floor just to hear it shatter. But she did none of those things. She sat in silence because that was what a good wife did in a house that had no warmth to lose. One evening she heard him come in late. She waited behind her bedroom door, ear pressed to the wood like a child listening for monsters. She heard the quiet clink of a glass, the low murmur of a phone call. She opened the door just a crack and saw him in the living room, tie loosened, hair mussed, eyes shadowed by something she could not name. He looked so tired, so alone, so beautifully human in that small, stolen moment that she almost called out to him. But when his eyes flicked to the hallway, she pulled back, heart hammering against her ribs, breath caught in her throat. She waited until she heard his footsteps fade before crawling back into bed, sleepless and burning. It was Harris who gave her the first piece of truth she could hold on to. He found her in the library one afternoon, tracing her fingers along rows of books she did not recognize. "Madame, is there anything you need?" he asked, voice soft enough to feel like kindness. She almost lied. She almost smiled and shook her head, but the question broke something open in her chest. "Is he always like this?" she asked. Harris paused, hands clasped behind his back. "He is a private man, madam. He has endured much that does not concern you." She lifted her chin, met the older man's steady gaze. "I am his wife," she said, her voice trembling just enough to shame her. "Does that mean nothing?" Harris's eyes softened. "It means you are here, madam, and that changes more than you know." She turned those words over in her head long after he left. What did it mean to be here? What did it change? She began to watch Adrian more closely after that. Small things, the way he pressed his hand to his side when he thought no one could see, the way he stood too long under the spray of the shower until steam curled beneath her door. Once she passed his study late at night and heard a quiet groan, low and raw, before he cleared his throat and the house fell silent again. She did not believe the rumors anymore, not the way she once did. She saw the way his eyes dropped to her throat when she wore her hair down, the way his breath hitched when she leaned too close to reach a dish at breakfast. Small things, tiny betrayals of a man who wanted to pretend he did not want. One night she stood before her mirror in the blue suite, tracing the line of her collarbone with the tip of her finger. She thought about the soft silk slip folded neatly in the back of her wardrobe, a gift from one of the stylists who had prepared her for the wedding, never worn. She wondered what he would do if she wore it, if she crossed the cold hallway barefoot, if she knocked on his door not as an obligation, but as a woman who deserved to be seen. Her pulse quickened at the thought. She turned away from the mirror, pressed her palms flat to the cold marble counter. She did not know where the courage came from. Maybe it was born in the crack between all the silent breakfasts and the empty nights. Maybe it had always lived inside her, waiting for the moment when her fear of being invisible would finally outweigh her fear of being rejected. She would not sleep alone tonight. She would not lie in that cold bed and wonder if he dreamed of anyone but her. She would find out, if there was any truth left to break through the walls he built so carefully around himself. The silk slip felt like water against her skin. Lena stood in front of the tall mirror in her suite, one hand pressed to her stomach to steady the trembling inside her. The fabric clung to her waist and fell in a soft whisper around her thighs. She had never worn anything like this before, never let so much of herself stand bare in a room where someone else might see. She wondered if he would even open the door. She wondered if he would laugh. Or worse, if he would look through her like glass and turn away. She crossed the marble floor in bare feet, every step echoing louder than her heartbeat. The hallway was dark, the soft glow of the city pressing in through the wall of windows at the far end. She paused at his door, hand hovering over the polished wood. For a moment she almost turned back, but then she thought of her father's hollow eyes when he signed the papers. She thought of the empty side of her bed. She thought of the way Adrian's eyes dropped to her mouth when he thought she could not see. She knocked. The silence on the other side stretched so long she almost knocked again. Then she heard the low scrape of something heavy, the click of a latch. The door opened just enough for him to look at her. His hair was damp, curling slightly at his temple. He wore a plain white shirt, the top buttons undone, shadows clinging to the hollow of his throat. His eyes flicked down, caught the slip of silk, and his jaw tensed so sharply she could almost hear it crack. Lena. Her name sounded different in his voice, rougher than she had ever heard it. She lifted her chin. I couldn't sleep, she said. She hated how small her voice sounded, but she forced the words out. May I come in? For a moment he did not move. Then he stepped back, just far enough for her to slip past him into the room. The master suite was larger than her entire childhood apartment. Warm pools of lamplight touched dark wood, glass, the edge of a massive bed she had never seen up close. Papers lay scattered across a desk near the window, next to a glass half full of something amber and sharp. She heard the door click shut behind her. She did not turn to look at him, yet. She could feel him standing there, close enough that the air shifted with the heat of his body. When she did turn, he was watching her like she was something dangerous, something fragile and burning all at once. He did not speak. He did not move closer. He simply watched. She swallowed. I want to ask you something, she said. His brow twitched, but he said nothing. She stepped closer, her toes sinking into the edge of the soft rug that separated them. Is it true? Her voice caught, but she did not stop. Is it true, what they say, that you cannot? His eyes shuddered, lashes lowering to hide the raw edge that flickered there. You should not ask questions you do not want the answers to, he said. She almost laughed, a quiet, desperate sound. I think I do. His hands flexed at his sides, fingers curling into his palms as if he were holding something back with every nerve in his body. She lifted her hand, let her fingers hover over the place where his shirt gaped open at his chest. May I? She whispered. He did not answer, but he did not step away either. She let her fingers brush his skin, felt the heat of him, the faint tremor under her touch. His breath stuttered in his throat. Her fingers traced higher over the steady pound of his heartbeat. She looked up and found his eyes on hers, pupils blown wide and dark. Then why? She asked, her voice so soft she wondered if he could hear it over the rush of blood between them. Why do you keep away from me? He closed his eyes, just for a second, like the question hurt more than her touch. Because, he said, his voice a low rasp. Because you deserve more than a man who cannot be trusted to stop. She frowned. Stop what? His mouth twitched like he almost smiled, but there was no humor in it. Stop wanting, he said. Stop taking, stop destroying things I should protect. Lena's pulse tripped over itself. She flattened her palm against his chest, felt the hard thud of his heart. You're not broken, she said. She could see it now, plain as breath on glass. You're not cold. You're terrified. He opened his eyes, met hers with something raw and unguarded for the first time. I nearly died in that car, he said. I woke up not knowing if I would ever feel anything below my waist again. I spent months learning how to stand, how to walk, how to look in a mirror and see something worth saving. And when I could feel again, when I knew I could want, I realized wanting is worse. Wanting means risk. Risk means losing control. His hands lifted, hovered near her shoulders but did not touch. And if I lose control with you? He shook his head. I will not break you, Lena. I will not be the reason you hurt. She let out a breath that tasted like hope and fear tangled together. Maybe I want you to lose control, she whispered. Maybe I am tired of pretending I do not want you to. The silence between them pulsed like a heartbeat. Then his hands landed on her shoulders, warm and strong, thumbs brushing the edge of the silk where it slipped over her collarbone. His head dipped low enough that she could feel the ghost of his breath against her cheek. You should leave, he said, voice rough, not quite steady. "I will not ask again." She shook her head, her hair brushing his wrist. "I will not." His grip tightened, fingers sinking into the curve of her arms. His forehead dropped to hers, breath shallow and hot. "You do not know what you are asking for." She did not flinch. "Then show me." He made a sound then, low and desperate, somewhere between a laugh and a groan. His hand slid to her waist, the slip of silk catching between his fingers as he pulled her closer. She felt the heat of him, the hard line of muscle under cotton, the sharp edge of restraint that trembled between them. For a moment he held her there, suspended in the space between want and ruin. Then he kissed her. It was not gentle, it was not careful. It was a collision, heat and salt and breath and everything she had waited for pouring out all at once. His mouth moved over hers with a hunger that tasted like apology and promise. His hands tangled in her hair, tugging just enough to tip her head back, to bare her throat to the soft scrape of his mouth. She gasped against him, fingers fisting in the fabric of his shirt. She felt the way his body shuddered, the way he pressed her back until her spine met the cold wall. He pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were wild, pupils blown, breath ragged. "Say stop," he said, voice so low she almost missed it. "If you want me to stop, say it now." She lifted her chin, her lips swollen, her chest heaving against the thin slip of silk. "I want you to show me. I want to know." Something inside him snapped. She felt it in the way his hands gripped her hips, the way his mouth crashed back to hers with a force that left her dizzy. He pressed closer, one hand slipping under the silk, burning a trail up her side until his thumb brushed the soft underside of her breast. She gasped, her head tipping back to the wall. He groaned, the sound muffled against her skin. When he lifted her, her legs wrapped around his waist without thought. He carried her across the room like she weighed nothing, setting her down on the edge of his bed. She watched him in the soft light, watched the careful way he pushed the strap of her slip down her shoulder, watched the way his breath hitched when the silk fell away. His eyes met hers, searching, asking a question without words. She nodded, her pulse a roar in her ears. He leaned in, pressed his mouth to the hollow of her throat, tasting the frantic beat of her pulse. She felt the heat of him, the solid proof of every rumor turned to ash between them. She let her hands trace the line of his back, the hard plane of muscle that trembled under her touch. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes burned into hers, a promise and a warning all at once. "This is your last chance," he said, voice racked and beautiful. "If I start, I will not stop." She cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs brushing the edge of his jaw. "Then do not stop," she whispered. "I do not want you to stop." The last thread of restraint slipped through his fingers. He kissed her again, deeper, rougher, a claim written in the language of skin and breath and need. The room around them blurred into shadows and warmth. For the first time since she had stood on cracked steps, dreaming of plains and other skies, Lena felt like she had found exactly where she was meant to be. Lena did not remember when she stopped shivering. One moment she was pressed against the sheets, silk pooling at her waist, the cold air of the room raising goosebumps on her skin. The next, she was drowning in the heat of him, every place he touched blazing with a warmth that chased every ghost from her bones. Adrian's breath was harsh against her collarbone as he hovered above her, arms braced on either side of her shoulders like he was holding back a storm. For a moment she thought he might pull away again, that he might catch himself in the middle of this wildfire and step back into the cold distance he had clung to for so long. But then his eyes met hers, and whatever line he had drawn for himself vanished. His mouth found hers again, slower now but no less hungry, a deep consuming drag of lips and tongue that made her toes curl into the sheets. She felt the low sound that rumbled in his chest when she arched closer, felt the way his fingers trembled as they brushed along her side. Every piece of her that had felt invisible in his house now burned bright under his hands. He traced the line of her ribs, the dip of her waist, the soft swell of her hip, like he was memorizing a truth he had been too afraid to touch. She wanted to tell him she was afraid too, not of him, but of how much she needed him, of how easily her body answered his, of how her heart seemed to stutter and trip every time he whispered her name against her skin. She wanted to say all of it, but her mouth could only shape his name, again and again, a prayer and a plea. He kissed it from her lips, swallowed every sound until the room was nothing but heat and the quiet rush of their breathing. When he pulled back just enough to look at her, his pupils were so dark she could barely see the pale ice of his eyes. He brushed a knuckle against her cheek, his touch so careful it almost broke her. "Say it again," he murmured, voice raw. She lifted her hand to his jaw, fingers tracing the faint stubble, the sharp edge of his cheekbone. "Adrian," she breathed, "I want you. I want all of you." His answer was a sound she felt more than heard, a low growl that vibrated against her throat as he pressed his mouth there. She felt the heat of his breath slide down her chest, his hands pushing the silk slip fully away until it pooled useless on the floor. For a heartbeat she almost flinched, so exposed under his hungry gaze. But then he cursed softly, a word that made her insides twist and her legs press closer to him. "Beautiful," he murmured, like he was speaking to himself. She reached for him, but he caught her wrists gently, pinned them above her head with one hand as he kissed down her ribs. The restraint should have terrified her, but instead it grounded her, tethered her to the warmth and weight of him. Every place his mouth touched left a mark she could feel long after he moved lower. When his teeth grazed the soft curve just above her hip, her back bowed off the bed. "Adrian," she gasped, but the rest of her plea dissolved when his mouth dragged lower, when his breath ghosted over her in ways that made her thighs tremble and her heart pound like a drum. She felt him smile against her skin, the sharp edge of his control slipping as he tasted the parts of her no one had ever touched. It was too much and not enough all at once. She tugged at her pinned wrists, but he only pressed her hands tighter to the sheets, a low warning sound vibrating against her. When he finally lifted his head, his mouth was swollen, his breathing harsh. He released her wrists, and for a moment she thought he might say something to pull them both back from the edge, but instead he pressed his forehead to hers, his voice a ragged whisper. "Tell me to stop, Lena." Her answer was her mouth on his, teeth catching his lower lip until he hissed against her tongue. "I told you," she breathed. "I do not want you to stop." His restraint shattered with that. He kissed her like he would never taste her again, like he had been starving for this one forbidden thing since the day they signed the first paper. She felt his hands slide under her thigh, lifting her just enough to press closer, the hard proof of him pressing against her hip. She froze then, the reality of it burning through the haze of want. He felt it, the way her body tensed, and he pulled back just enough to search her face. "We can stop," he rasped. His thumb brushed her cheek, tracing the flush that bloomed under her skin. "You do not owe me this." She shook her head so quickly her hair brushed across his wrist. "I want this," she said, fierce enough that her voice barely trembled. "I want you to show me everything they said you could not give. I want it to be me." His eyes darkened, his control slipping with every heartbeat. He kissed her again, softer now, as if sealing a promise she had written for both of them. She felt his hands slide between them, felt the careful way he guided her hips, his breath breaking against her shoulder as he pushed forward. The burn of it made her gasp, but she held on to him, her fingers digging into his back, her nails leaving small crescents that only made him groan louder. He pressed his mouth to her ear, his voice breaking. "I cannot hurt you." She laughed then, a small choked sound that cracked open something deep in her chest. "You are not hurting me. You are saving me." The truth of it settled between them like a vow. His next thrust was deeper, the low growl he made echoing in the hollow of her throat. She lost count of the minutes after that. Time dissolved into the steady rhythm of his body moving with hers, the soft curses he whispered in a voice she barely recognized as his. She had imagined it so many nights alone in the cold blue bed, but nothing compared to the heat of him, the way he filled every empty space inside her until she could not remember what loneliness felt like. When her body tensed around him, her nails scraping over his spine, he pressed his mouth to her shoulder, his breath hot and frantic. "Let go," he whispered, a command and a plea all at once. "Let go for me, Lena." She did. The rush of it pulled a broken sound from her lips, her whole world narrowing to the sharp, bright burn of pleasure that rolled through her in waves. She felt him follow her over the edge, his grip on her hips bruising, his voice a raw snarl against her throat. When it was over, he did not pull away. He stayed pressed to her, forehead resting against hers, their breaths tangling in the hush that followed the storm. She traced lazy circles over his shoulder, feeling the fine tremor that still danced under his skin. He lifted his head just enough to look at her, his eyes clearer now, but softer too, like some distant frost had finally cracked. "I never wanted this to be just a contract," he murmured, voice hoarse. "I told myself I could keep you safe if I stayed away." She brushed her thumb over the corner of his mouth, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "You cannot protect me from yourself, Adrian." He closed his eyes, a low breath escaping him. "Maybe I do not want to anymore." He rolled onto his side, pulling her with him so they lay tangled together in the warm hush of the master's suite. Outside the windows, the city lights flickered like distant stars. Somewhere far below, people whispered about the billionaire who could not touch and the girl who married him anyway. But up here in the quiet dark, Lena knew the truth. She felt it in the way his fingers traced her spine, the way his mouth found hers again and again, like he needed to remind himself she was real. For the first time since the day she signed her name next to his, Lena believed she was not just here to pay her father's debts. She was here because she had found the one man whose walls were made to be broken. And she would break them, again and again, until there was nothing left but the truth they built in the silence of a bed too big for just one body. Lena woke to the soft glow of dawn pushing through the floor-to-ceiling windows. For a moment she lay very still, listening to the slow rise and fall of Adrian's breath beside her. His arm draped heavy across her waist, his fingers tangled loosely in the silk sheet that barely covered them both. In the pale light, his face seemed softer, the sharp lines of his jaw and brow eased by the quiet that only morning could bring. She watched the slow flutter of his lashes as he slept, felt the steady beat of his heart where their bodies touched. She wondered if he ever truly slept before this night, if he ever let himself drift so deeply that he forgot the weight of everything he carried alone. She wondered if the man the world whispered about would even recognize the man beside her now, warm and real and so painfully human in the hush between darkness and day. She shifted just enough to press her lips to his shoulder, the faintest brush of a kiss that made him stir but did not wake. She lay there a moment longer, breathing in the scent of him, the quiet heat of him, memorizing every piece of proof that he was not some cold rumor wrapped in a perfect suit. He was flesh and bone and heat and want, and for now, at least, he was hers. When she slipped from the bed, his arm fell away with a soft drag of fabric. She pulled the sheet around her, patted across the wide expanse of polished floor to where his shirt lay draped over a low chair. She slipped it on, the hem brushing her thighs, the collar heavy with the faint scent of him. She caught her reflection in the mirror near the door, hair wild, mouth still swollen from his kisses, eyes dark with secrets she no longer wanted to hide. Down the hall, the penthouse was as silent as always. The walls gleamed under the first touch of sunlight. Lena moved barefoot through the living space, pausing by the wide windows that looked out over the waking city. She pressed her palm to the glass, watching taxis and early commuters crawl like ants so far below. For a moment, the vastness of it made her chest tighten. Somewhere down there, her old life waited. A father with new debts that would come in different shapes. Neighbors who would whisper about the girl who disappeared into a tower of steel and secrets. She wondered if they would ever know the truth, if they would ever see that she was not a sacrifice but a storm, something gentle and fierce enough to break through walls even money could not buy. She turned away from the window when she heard soft footsteps behind her. Adrian stood in the hallway, one hand braced on the doorframe, like he was deciding whether to stay in this moment or slip back into the cold armor he wore so well. His hair was a mess, his eyes dark and soft all at once. He took her in, standing there in his shirt, bare legs and bare feet, and the faint flush that still colored her throat where his mouth had lingered hours before. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them felt fragile, like the wrong word would send them both crashing back to the cold distance they had fought so hard to cross. She lifted her chin, bracing for the silence she half expected. But instead, he pushed off the doorframe, crossed to her in 3 long strides, and wrapped his hands around her face. He kissed her, like they had not just spent the entire night burning through every rumor that haunted them. He kissed her, like he was starving for it all over again. When he pulled back, his thumb traced her lower lip, eyes searching hers. "I should apologize," he said. His voice was rough but clear. "I should say I am sorry for last night." She blinked up at him, breathless. "Are you?" His mouth twitched at the corner, almost a smile, but not quite. "No." He dropped his forehead to hers, a quiet laugh huffed against her cheek. "I am not sorry at all." She pressed her palms to his chest, felt the steady thrum of his heartbeat. "Then do not pretend to be," she whispered. "Do not pretend any of it was a mistake." He pulled back enough to look at her, his expression shuddered but his eyes too raw to hide the truth. "It was never a mistake, Lena." He said her name like it cost him something, but gave him everything in return. "I only wanted to keep you safe. From me. From this." She stepped back just enough to see him clearly. "Do you really think you can break me? Do you think I am so fragile?" He shook his head, the faintest ghost of that smile tugging at his lips. "No," he said. "I think you are the strongest thing I have ever touched, and that terrifies me more than anything else." Before she could answer, a soft chime broke the hush between them. Adrian's head turned sharply toward the hallway. A second chime, then Harris's measured footsteps approaching. Adrian stepped forward, positioning himself just slightly in front of her, like a shield he did not even realize he had raised. Harris paused at the edge of the room, eyes politely lowered. "Sir, I am sorry to interrupt." Adrian's voice was clipped, colder now, but not as icy as it had once been. "What is it?" Harris's gaze flicked to Lena just once before he spoke. "A message from the legal team, sir, regarding the press inquiry. They want to know how you wish to respond to the rumors that surfaced last night." Adrian's shoulders stiffened. "What rumors?" Harris cleared his throat, his voice gentle but steady. "Someone leaked the marriage contract, sir. The papers are implying that the marriage is a cover, that Mrs. Cole is only here to secure your position while avoiding questions about your—" He hesitated, choosing the word carefully. "Your ability to continue the family line." Lena felt the cold slide into her chest like a knife. She stepped forward, her hand brushing Adrian's back. He did not flinch away this time. He reached behind him, catching her fingers, holding tight. "Tell them nothing," Adrian said, voice low but cutting. "If they want to guess, let them guess wrong." Harris inclined his head. "Of course, sir. I will see to it." When the butler slipped away, the silence rushed back in. Adrian turned to her, his hands still tangled with hers. "I can shut them up," he said quietly. "Money, lawyers, threats. It will not touch you." She shook her head, anger burning up through the fear that had first pricked her chest. "Let them talk. Let them wonder. We know the truth." He lifted her hand to his mouth, pressed a kiss to her knuckles. His eyes flicked to hers, sharp and soft all at once. They will keep coming. They will dig until they find something to break us. She stepped closer, her free hand sliding to the back of his neck. Then let them. If they come for us, they will find me standing in front of you. His mouth twitched, a low laugh rumbling in his chest. You think you can protect me? She rose onto her toes, pressed her mouth to his. I know I can. For a moment, the city vanished behind the windows. There was no tower, no rumor, no hush of scandal waiting outside the door. There was only his heartbeat under her palm, and the truth burning bright between them. She was not here because she was a debt to be paid or a secret to be hidden. She was here because he needed her, more than he would ever admit to the world. She was here because he had given her the one thing no money could buy, himself. When they broke apart, he pressed his forehead to hers again. His voice was a quiet promise against her skin. I will not let them touch you. She smiled then, fierce and soft at once. Then do not. Let them watch, let them whisper, and when they are done, they will see what we are. Adrian's breath caught, the faintest smile breaking through the frost. And what are we? She drew him down, lips brushing his. Real, she whispered, and unstoppable. Outside, the world waited to test them, to twist every rumor into poison. But inside these walls, Lena knew the truth was stronger than any lie ever whispered about a man too cold to feel. She had found the heat buried under all that marble and steel, and she would never let it fade again. Lena stood at the floor-to-ceiling window that framed the city like a living painting. The sky beyond the glass was streaked with pale gold and soft pink, the first promise of a new day pushing its way between towers of steel and glass. She could see the streets below already filling with people who would never know how this tower once held only cold and silence and secrets. Now it held something warmer, something alive. She felt Adrian's presence before she heard him. His reflection joined hers in the glass, taller and broader, the soft white of his shirt catching the dawn light. He slipped his arms around her waist, pulled her back against his chest, and rested his chin on her shoulder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply breathed together, steady and quiet, 2 heartbeats in the hush before the city roared awake. She let her head tip back just enough to feel the warmth of his jaw against her temple. Last night felt like a dream, but the steady weight of his hands on her hips, the warmth of his breath, told her it was real, that he was real, that everything they had shattered and rebuilt in the dark would stand now in the light. Do you regret any of it? He asked, his voice low, words rumbling through his chest and into her spine. She smiled, her eyes still fixed on the river of headlights far below. Not a single moment, she said, not even the parts that hurt. He hummed, the sound soft and thoughtful. I spent years trying to keep the world out. He pressed a slow kiss behind her ear, his breath sending a shiver through her skin. Then you walked in and tore the walls down with one look. She turned in his arms to face him, her hands sliding up to rest over his heart. It was always there, she said. The heat, the want. You just needed someone to remind you how to feel it. He tipped his head, eyes tracing every line of her face like he was memorizing her all over again. And you, he asked, brushing his thumb over her lower lip. What do you need now? Lena laughed softly, the sound bright in the quiet penthouse. Just this, she said. This room, this moment. You, the rumors can come, the world can come, but they will not break us again. His mouth curved at the corner, that quiet promise she had waited so long to see. They will not, he said, because you are the only truth I need. She pressed up onto her toes, kissed him once, soft and certain. When she pressed back, she caught her reflection again in the glass behind him. The girl who once sat on cracked steps in Queens, tracing planes across the sky, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own power. A woman who had found fire in the coldest place and refused to let it die. Outside, the city would whisper, the papers would print half-truths and old lies, but none of it mattered. Rumors could break stone, but they could not touch what was real. In this quiet place above the noise, she had chosen him, and he had chosen her back. She tucked her head under his chin, felt his hand tighten at her lower back. Let them watch, she thought. Let them wonder. Love, built in secrets, could survive anything when it was true enough to burn through every whispered doubt. When Adrian spoke again, his words were soft but carried the sharp edge of a vow. "No more closed doors," he said. "No more cold beds." She smiled into his chest. "No more silence," she whispered back. "Only us." Outside, the first rays of sunlight caught the towers in gold. Inside, the truth pulsed steady and warm, a promise stronger than any rumor, because when love is real enough, no lie can bury it forever.